I'm going to try to explain this as succinctly as I can, but it's very complex. So I can understand why your first thought would be, what did he do to her? But it's much more complex than that. So I grew up believing that my maternal family name was Jones, okay? I was raised by Alberta Jones. My mom was Debbie Jones. My grandfather was Al Jones. My great-grandfather was John David Jones, okay? Several years back, I was told that Jones was never their family name, that was a fake name, that when they immigrated from Canada to the United States, they changed their name from Oke, O-K-E, to Jones. Okay, so I knew that. And then I had heard from multiple sources that the reason why they changed their name was because my great-grandfather, John David Jones, was in the Canadian Mafia, and they were running from something, and they had to change their name so that they would never be found. I've never found any evidence of this, that there was any mafia thing. I'm still looking into it. I think there could be some like criminal activity in his family, but I don't know. I've never found any proof of that. I think personally that was a lie, that he and his wife, my great-grandmother Ethel, decided to tell the children to justify lots of things, okay? So anyway, back in 2017, I took an ancestry DNA test, and someone popped up, a close family relative, not super close, but close enough that I was like, who is this person? And when I got in touch with him, it became obvious to me and to him that my great-grandfather, John David Jones, was not the biological father of my grandfather, Alfred Jones, okay? And I was like, whoa, that's weird, okay. So I kind of went on a little quest to figure out who my biological great-grandfather was. I knew that his name was Alfred Thomas Knight, but I was just looking for years for any records of who he was. Now, last year, I kind of cracked that wall down, and I found his Canadian Expeditionary Force military record, and it was very lengthy, okay? There's like over 100 pages in this, because this was during World War I, and he did end up in France during the Battle of Passchendaele, which was one of the most significant bloody battles in military history. And this was where the idea of shell shock came from, okay? Because the bombs that were being used at that time were like just effing up people's nervous systems. And so anyway, in 1917, at the end of that battle, the records say that he was found like shaking and unwell. So they put him on a 2-week leave of absence. He went to his in-laws, my great-grandmother's family in Cornwall. She wasn't there at the time. She was in Canada with the children. So he went to Cornwall to stay with his in-laws just to like get better. I think he was probably really psychiatrically disturbed during that 2-week leave. And her family probably sent her a telegram saying like, he's messed up. And at the time, mental illness was not, I mean, it still isn't looked at favorably, but at the time it was like a huge shame, especially because she came from a very respected military family in Cornwall. And so I think they told her, hey, he's messed up. You need to start thinking about what you're going to do with your kids, figure something out. So while he was in the hospital for a year, he was hospitalized for a year for what looked like a nervous condition. So he had sciatica, but I think it was probably more like functional or neurological disorder, which is shell shock. That's what they thought shell shock was. People think shell shock and PTSD are close to each other, but I think it's much more functional or neurological disorder, because people would develop these neurological conditions that really didn't have a physical basis that they could find at the time. So anyway, his record says that when he was discharged, let me point this out too. At some point, he managed to falsify his age. So I know his exact birth date for sure. I have multiple documents that prove that he was born in 1875. But at some point, he was able to falsify his date of birth so that he would be released from the military on the premise that he was too old. So all of these things, the fact that he was wounded psychiatrically, that he lied on his documentation to not have to go back into the service, I think that brought my great-grandmother a great deal of shame. And so while he was hospitalized during 1918, she remarried and absconded with the children. So it was basically a parental abduction where she stole those kids away from him. And, to my knowledge, he never saw or heard from them again. Now, I found them in the census in 1921. So by the time 1921 rolled around, they had changed the family name to Jones. I'm sure this was done with fake documents that my great-grandfather somehow obtained. And then they came to the United States under the name Jones. The kids were all young enough, except for my grandfather, They were all young enough that they probably didn't remember their real father. I think my grandfather was 5, so he probably met his father like in between the times when he was away in the war. But I don't know if he remembered his dad. My grandfather ended up being a career criminal. My mom ended up being a career criminal. So I do think that genetically there is some generational trauma that is trickling down from my great-grandfather, which is why I find his story to be relevant. So that's the long and short of it. Oh, I did end up finding his third family. So he did have a family back in England before he met my great-grandmother and had children. Then he met my great-grandmother in Canada and had children with her. And then after she left with the kids, he met another woman and had 3 children with her. And I was able to find the granddaughter, his granddaughter, and kind of just, that's where that photo came from, was from her. That's the only photo. Well, I have another photo that I think might be him, but I'm not 100% sure. But that's the only confirmed photo that I have of him. And she did say that he was not abusive, that there was no information that he was abusive. It was just that he was very quiet and not a good provider. And I think that that was probably an extension of the psychological damage that he went through. So anyway, that's the long and short of it. I can understand why my great-grandmother felt like she had to do what she had to do to provide for her kids. But on the other hand, I can only imagine how disturbing it was for him to come home after being in the war and fighting for what he believed was a good cause and doing his duty, and coming home and being abandoned and having his kids taken away. Like, that had to be pretty terrible too. Anyway, I do know that my great-grandmother also did some other sketchy things that affected my mom. So there's a lot there.